In the spirit of transparency, today my presentation may be slightly uncomfortable for some of you. It could be. I understand that I have my truth, and I understand and recognize that you have your truths as well. My goal today is to have us look at some comments that are possibly uncomfortable, and your resistance to it is fine. I understand, but I hope you can be open to the possibility of being uncomfortable with some issues. To be truthful, I was a little hesitant to come and present today. I was a little resistant to it because often deaf people that speak out are labeled as angry, negative. People blow them off, and I hope you don't see me that way. I'm giving you tips. I'm things to think about, to analyze for yourself. I always am going to respect your opinion and your views, and I hope you respect mine as well. Really, I value and cherish problems, ideas, facts, opinions. We can work on this together. The picture that I just showed was 5 weeks ago. My 2-year-old son fell and broke his leg. Oh, it was hard. But it's fine now. We went to the doctor a week later for a checkup at the orthopedic. My town's pretty small, 23,000 people, 250, 300 deaf people live there. It is a school for the deaf city, so people know interpreters. They know deaf people. They're not awkward about it. This doctor happened to be new. When I arrived to the waiting room, I sat there 45 minutes. Understand, I had my 2-year-old and I had a 1-year-old baby with me. Oh my goodness, talk about restless. You know, we were there through lunch. 45 minutes for a small town. Access is usually easy. You're in and out. Interpreters show up and people understand that they're there. It doesn't take very long. So the secretary or the front desk person didn't look at me. She was typing on her computer and didn't look. I tried to get her attention. I said, "Do you notice that my kids are restless? Is there a way that we can put me up earlier in the line?" And she just said no. I said, "Maybe you can speak to a doctor or a nurse." Still not looking at me. She was shaking her head no while she continued to type. Remember, this is a small town, period. And I said, "Would you mind looking at me?" She kind of looked up, and really she looked behind me at the interpreter, not at me. I said, "No, look at me." Blank stare on her face. She looked, and I said, "You can see. I've been here an hour. You know, the medication that my child needs is at home. I've been sitting here." And she just continued with her hands on the keyboard and shook her head no. My baby started crying. And she realized, seriously, the baby started crying right there. It was like it was on cue. Perfect timing. So she said, let me call somebody and see what we can do. So a nurse came very shortly afterwards and apologized profusely to me. "Oh, soon it's going to be your turn, soon." And I said, I need to make a formal complaint about the secretary and her attitude, the front desk person. She said, "Great, let's talk to the office manager." That was good with me. So I went back and sat down. And when I went to take a seat, they called the interpreter. Didn't call me, but they called the interpreter. And I was wondering why the interpreter went up there. They said the interpreter had a phone call. So the interpreter spoke on the phone for a minute and then waved me over. And she said, "It's for me." And I thought, why do I have a phone call? It was the office manager. She immediately had called to discuss my situation with the front desk person. So she was asking me questions through the interpreter, but the person was right there we were talking about, kind of staring at me at this point. So finally I had to say, "I'm not comfortable with this. Can we go somewhere else?" So she agreed. She said, "I'll contact you this afternoon." So I went back to my seat again and sat down and looked over, and I saw the interpreter with her hand over her mouth whispering to the front desk person and then walked back over to me. When the interpreter came and sat down across from me, I said, "What did you say?" She said, "Nothing." I said, "You were whispering." "No." I said, "I saw you whispering to the woman." It looked like she finally gave up and decided to tell me. She said, "I'm sorry to her. She didn't intend to be negative to you. She wasn't trying to dismiss you." And I told her it was okay. And I said, it's not okay. It's not okay for me. Why did you decide for me? And so I told the interpreter, why would you have spoken up for me instead of coming directly through me? You bypassed me. At that point, we got called back in. And the interpreter is fine. I would work with that interpreter again. This situation happened to occur that day. But it did cause me to think about that later. You know, it's disempowerment. And I began to really think about it. So a simple definition of a powerful word, disempowerment, means to strip someone of their power. As a sign language interpreter, you have to be careful. I know there's a delicate line. We mediate personalities, culture, languages, all while interpreting. I get that. I get that perspective, and it's a challenge, and we all know that. At the same time, I'm speaking as a person whose family, the whole family, over 600 years of deafness and have experience with that. You know, children, CDIs, deaf of deaf. You know, I'm kind of central in the community, and that's how I'm looked at, and that's important for me. I grew up in the deaf community and in the hearing community, both, and yes, they're different, but they have a lot of similarities. There are so many similarities. When I really look at disempowerment, that's the perspective we're going to look at it. There's two kinds of disempowerment. There's situational disempowerment, which I just explained, and that was the interpreter speaking up and telling somebody it's okay. She took my power in that situation. And then there's economic, which we'll talk about more this afternoon. Y'all are going to discuss it this afternoon. Right now, I'm limited to about 20 minutes. And we'll talk more about the connectivity and how to keep that going. This picture I showed goes way back to when I was 13 years old in disempowerment. Ooh, that was a bad perm. So I went to a public high school. The public high school had 80 deaf students and 8 full-time interpreters. None of them were certified, of course, at that time, but 8 full-time interpreters. There was one class I took. I took a theater class. There were 3 other deaf students in there with me. I think maybe 25, 30 hearing students in there. And the interpreter came every day, never missed. Every day, that interpreter would criticize my signs. First hour of the morning, I started off my day completely down, feeling negative. That interpreter would criticize me, everything I did. And she's like, oh, you're too ASL. Oh, you're signing too fast. And often in the class, when I would try to raise my hand and participate, the interpreter, who did not understand my signing, would speak, gibberish because of my signs. Really? Of course, the students and the teachers would just start laughing. That disempowered me. Really, I mean, you can see it. You can see it. So I had no trust. My self-image at the time, was I deaf? I was already struggling with that. Where did I fit in? The interpreter was masking her lack of fluency in American Sign Language and receptiveness, and she stripped my power. She disempowered me. I was embarrassed. Humiliation. So to this day, when anyone approaches me, and it's never deaf, it's hearing, when somebody approaches me and says, you sign fast, deaf don't say that to me, which is interesting. Oh, you sign fast. I automatically, boom, I go right back to that time. I'm that 13-year-old girl again. So I'm over it. I am. But inside me, I still have that experience. Interpreters really should never disempower people for their own lack of fluency. The goal of interpreters are to make sure that communication access happens, not to disempower deaf people. You need to remember that all the time. And we understand that interpreters are not intentionally disempowering us. There are some times that are intentional and some that are not intentional, but the intentional strip of power and disempowerment, that's what we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So, sometimes we've shown this, that hearing interpreters take advantage of the deaf community. Sometimes deaf people take advantage of them. And we're talking about disproportionate taking advantage of somebody with economics. So it's like, ooh, this person, there was a advertisement for a car. And so I think we've seen this. People show it less, but still. This is a woman named Holly. And this is an absolute true story. I'm not making it up, and there is no exaggeration in it. 1997, there was the Saturn company, car maker. And they had a TV advertisement. And they had it in print as well. They said, "Real people, real cars" was their logo. So they filmed actual owners of Saturns, people that had that car, not actors. And I'm going to say it again. They were not actors. They were supposed to be real people. So Holly, I saw the TV ad, 1997. And I thought, something's kind of off. Didn't really look deaf. The advertisement said that she was deaf. So I called Saturn. I called the company. And they said, yes, she is deaf. And I thought, all right. Time went on. And I filed a complaint. Well, we'll talk about more about that this afternoon in the rest of the workshop. But the quality of her signs in that commercial, there were a lot of there was a lot of negative feedback that I got on my letter, but that's okay. Many, many things happened. I'm trying to condense it into a shorter story. The bottom line is she was hearing. She was an educational interpreter. But word was in the community and the media and everywhere else that she was deaf. And remember, not an actor, a real person. So time went on, and I actually got to meet with her. And I said, "Are you deaf or hearing?" And she said, "I'm deaf. I have a twin sister. Everybody confuses me and the twin. I'm deaf. She's not." I said, "Can you prove that?" She said, "Yeah." She faxed me her birth certificate. I found out eventually that it was a falsified birth certificate. As I said, this is a very long story I'm trying to condense. So time went on. She finally came clean and admitted that she was hearing and that she had lied. At the same time, she got $75,000. Now, true enough, she got paid $10,000, and the rest of it the company took for the advertisement and things like that. But still, and it was like, the cost disparity in that. Should she be sued? Should she not? I mean, Holly, she's still working today as a sign language interpreter. She has yet to apologize to hearing interpreters or to the deaf community. And that happened. That is a prime example of disempowerment. So with the Holly situation, that was an extreme example of things. I realize that, but there are everyday smaller examples that happen. ASL teachers. How many ASL teachers in America? Thousands. Thousands. How many of those do you think are deaf? We don't know the number. There's not research on there, no statistical analysis at this time. How about sign language instructors that are certified? Many, but how many are deaf? I contacted a company that uses certified interpreters, but they won't contact me back. They haven't even replied. I'm assuming it's a very small percent that are deaf instructors. And one time I wrote an article about sign language instructors, and I think there's 700 baby sign language instructors that teach baby signs, 700 total, and this was, 5 or 6 years ago. So how many of those are deaf? I don't know. Deaf studies programs, maybe there's 25 or so, 30 in the United States. How many instructors are deaf? Not many. What's wrong with this picture? To be fair, I know that places have looked for qualified deaf instructors, teachers, and have not been able to find them, and that I understand. But, it's just, I suspect that they're not looking as well as they can. There are options. I mean, I'm talking about real world, perfect world situations. I understand it's not a perfect, ideal world, but there's three options. We could keep a position open and available until they found a deaf instructor, a deaf program, a deaf agency, whatever. Leave that position open until you find the qualified deaf person. Number two, you could put somebody in temporarily while you trained a deaf person to become qualified and then put them in that position. Does that cost money? Yes. Does it cost time? Of course it does. But in the long run, I think it's better. And the third way is to continue allow hearing teachers to teach deaf instead of deaf teaching deaf about deafness. By hiring deaf people into important positions, we help boost deaf economics. I learned deaf economics from an interview with Joel Barish. He strongly believes in deaf economics, and I had to ask him what it meant. And this is a quote from him. What he says is, if deaf people, well, let me back up. Hearing or deaf, it doesn't matter. If we support deaf businesses will grow. Then they will hire deaf, because deaf tend to hire deaf. So they will hire more deaf people, which means more deaf people are employed. That expands exponentially the growth. And then it makes the community grow, and it's more powerful. It's more empowering. It's more visible. There's more access. The community itself becomes more balanced. That's interesting. And what Joel said was that many people prefer to chase the cheaper rate. They communicate like I do. That's enough. They really kind of disregard social responsibility. In 2001, I went to Orlando to a RID conference. It was a perfect place. We were out at the pool. In 2001, we were laying out. I had another friend that was an interpreter, and we were laying out together. Remember, the pool part's really important. The sun, the pool. Everywhere I looked, there were interpreters. Some were signing, some were talking. That was fine. I looked at my friend and I said, wow, they're making money off my language. And I was just watching him. She's like, don't say that. That'll piss him off. Don't let him hear you say that. Years later, I thought about that and I began to think, pissed off? Why? Why? I'm not making fun. I'm not being judgmental. I make money off my language. I'm an interpreter. I run a writing company. I focus on ASL, English. I work with interpreters. I train interpreters. I teach ASL and English. What's wrong with that? Nothing. I have no problem with making money off my language. Now understand, there's always a but. Understand that the goal of making money aside, what's the true goal? What's the honest goal? Is it an interest in sharing language, sharing culture, language acquisition? That's what's important. If you have that, please, please, a million times, think for yourself. Do it. With that said, when I think about the big picture today in economics, employment, deaf people are somewhat behind while, hearing interpreters are soaring. When we look at legal interpreters and access and everything, people are like, oh yeah, I want to learn ASL. And it is a good opportunity for them to work, but not to disempower us. Lisa Callis. Do you remember that? We'll discuss it again, more this afternoon in the discussion. But wow. I'm not talking about the rightness or the wrongness. I just wish she had been able, she's a famous person. I wish she had been able to talk to deaf people. Why wasn't she referred back to the deaf community, to deaf agencies, and let people that are deaf represent what she spoke about? Not to disempower us, but that's just an example. When I think about why people are resistant to the idea of, talking about making money off language, there's rehab, there's vocational rehab, there's all kind of positions out there. But there's a harsh truth with that, very harsh. Understand, if we can accept it, sure, we're making money off that. But if we have the right goals and the right attitude, if we're accepting responsibility to work within our job and do the right thing and support the culture, it's all right. Really and truly, we need to engage with each other and talk. This afternoon we're going to go into more depth. Can you switch the slide for me? As interpreters, and as a deaf interpreter myself, it's very natural to automatically try to empathize with people. And that's natural. That's human nature, to form a connection. That interpreting situation I talked about with my son when he broke his leg, that interpreter, I understand, she felt bad. But at the same time, it was me, it was not her. Was it right? Was it wrong? That's up to you to decide. But speaking of the deaf community, that Lisa Callis story that I told you, I hope you understand that. Look at it from a deaf perspective. And then here on the slides, it's talking about job availability. Come on. If there's no availability, we need to figure out how. Where can we get deaf people to come into positions and give them power? Ideal world again. But if we're not hiring, if we don't hire somebody for that position, we need to ask, when a position is open, why not deaf? Ask the question. If an interpreter or deaf person is, if deaf people are upset, we call them angry. There's, they separate themselves into groups or whatever. But, myself included, I feel like I'm stripped of communication access a lot of time. It's belittling an interpreter, when she's saying, oh, that's okay. That's all right that you acted that way. No, that's taking my power. That's disempowerment. I did not blow up in that situation. I didn't. I was calm. But when I think about it in general, it does make your anger worsen. You remember that. You don't forget it. It's like, did I or somebody else? You have to think, did I contribute to that situation? Was I a trigger for something? As an interpreter, your first priority and responsibility is language facilitation, cultural mediation. At the same time, as a deaf interpreter, I'm responsible too. And the goals are the same: full access and mutual respect. This afternoon, we're going to be talking a lot more about different situations of deaf disempowerment, intentional and not intentional. We will talk more about it, but my goal, my own self-analysis is disempowerment, whether it's intentional or not intentional. The goal, I think, is the same. It's mutual respect. Thank you very much.